Hey guys, Heather here. I just wanted to do a quick video kind of addressing some tips and tricks of how to get back into reading if you've been away from it for a really long time. Especially since we suddenly have a lot of free time on our hands, I think it's super important that we're able to exercise remembering what life was before we all started working to death, like working ourselves to death, and before we all became our jobs. Especially for me, like in high school and early college, I read all the time, every day. It was my hobby. I was the girl with the book. I was the person that was constantly talking about all these weird surrealist novels that I was reading. Like, it was one of the main topics that I had, like, with my coworkers that I had at the time, my classmates, like, what books were we reading? Granted, we were all English majors, so we were all reading a lot, but even in my private time, I was still reading a lot. But as I got older and got more kind of attaching my self-worth to working, I kind of got out of reading and didn't really think that being a reader was something that made me worthwhile worthwhile, not worthwhile, wild, lol, I'm a tiger, grr. That reading did not make me a worthwhile person, and therefore it was something that I could like exclude from my personality and what made up me, because it did not help and influence the ways that I was making money. That is not true. I love reading. Reading is a huge part of my validation. Not been as grateful for in my life, and I am very grateful for now, especially since I have all this free time on my hands, and I have been reading a whole bunch and writing a whole bunch because I love it, and it is what makes me me. It is a part of my sense of self. And so if reading was a part of your sense of self and you want to help reignite that, this is the video for you. I'm going to go over some tips and tricks, and we'll see what happens, okay? So, tip number 1. You want to read children's, YA, or thriller books if you have not picked up in a really, really long time. Not because you're not capable of reading something more complex, and not because you're not able to read something that's a little bit more dense, but these books, especially YA and thriller and children's books, are written intentionally to grab and hold the attention of children. Children have very, very, very short attention span, so it would be a really easy way for you to take that rhythm that they're intentionally written in. I have my notes down here on my phone, sorry. Take that rhythm that they're written in and turn it into a momentum, so that whenever you finish that first book, you'll be able to pick up the next and be like, wow, I can't wait to read what I have next. I personally pretty much exclusively read children's books and YA books. Like, that includes like picture books, things that are written in like a lighthearted nature, not because I don't enjoy the harder stuff. And if I'm going to read something for casual reading, I want it to be like simple, straightforward, and emotional. So a couple of books that I would recommend for this are The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, which his name is hilarious to me. Like, a lot of elementary school kids read it. It's actually really, really good, and if you have an interest in anything kind of like surreal, it's the book for you. Another one that I would recommend is The Witch's Boy by Kelly Barnhill. It's very good, super emotional. If you want something that's gonna like make you cry like so many times that you feel like you are just a crying mess, I would pick this book up. The Animorph series, you can pretty much pick these up for 50 cents at like any Goodwill or a thrift store. It's something that will bring back nostalgia in you. And then, of course, like children's fairy tale books like this one, East of the Sun, West of the Moon, is really good. Even though it's a fairy tale book, it does not have a lot of pictures in it. I don't know if you guys can see that. My camera's washing it out a little bit. I also recommend, if you're not into like prose, I'm actually going to recommend Kate Tempest's Hold Your Own. It's very good, especially if you're queer like I am, a trans individual. It really, really, really handles the transformation of the prophet Tiresias. Very, very good. It's so humanizing to read, especially if you're yourself a trans individual. Highly recommend it. Super good. I was super surprised that it was as good as it was, just because I'm not a huge fan of poetry books. Usually they don't leave me very impressed. This one has left me impressed. Tip number 2. You want to read the first chapter, anything like that, all in one sitting. You want to try to carve out at least 30 minutes just for you and your book, so that you can pick through those first 2 chapters and really start picking up that momentum again. It's really important that you want to start reading your book whenever you know you're going to be uninterrupted, so that if interruptions come like that, you're going to have that like internal miffedness that's like, I'm reading this book, I don't want to go do that, and then you're going to go do the thing, and then you're going to want to come back to the book. It's going to make you want to return to the literature so much more. It gives you an excuse to come back because somebody has stopped you from getting farther. And whenever you read those first 3 chapters, you already have started to understand the characters, understand the plot, and you probably at this point have questions that you want answered. And if you only start reading the book at a period where you know you're going to be interrupted every 5 minutes, you're going to never get the chance to start developing that intimate relationship with the characters. But tip number 3 is turn off your phone, put it somewhere where you can't find it. It's kind of insane to say that with how connected we all are, but the huge thing that I think is really important about this is a phone can be an interruption, but whenever you're relearning how to love a book and relearn how to love reading and carving out that individual space for yourself, it is super, super important to disconnect from everyone else. But it's like a habit that I have. So I'll usually just put my phone on silent, hide it from myself so that in 30 minutes or so I could come back to like where it was and have to look for it. I'll be like, where's my phone at? And then I'll spend 15 minutes looking for it. And then I'll find it, and I'll be really glad that I didn't have it on me while I was reading, because I'll have like a bajillion notifications from like Instagram, from my boss, from my email, from my bank account telling me that I'm poor. That's going to stress you out while you're reading. And you don't want to be stressed out while you're reading. You want to be able to actually enjoy what you're consuming. At least I assume so, unless you're just reading for torture, which is a thing, and I have done it to myself. That's what college is. It actually makes it a lot easier to be able to decompress whenever you don't have all the electronic stuff. It's probably better for you just to be with yourself and the book with no noise. Probably the best idea. So tip number 4 is making reading part of your routine. So I personally do not use my morning routine as part of reading. For me, I kind of like to get up, take a shower, wash my face, brush my teeth, and then get started on my work for the day so that I can do reading as a leisure activity at the end of the night. So for my evening routine, pull out all of my yoga mats over here and the yoga blankets, put them out in front of here. I'll do like a video with Yoga with Adriene just to get my like blood flowing in my head, because I do kind of have to fight through my fibro fog a little bit. And then I will light my altar candle, do a little meditation, and then I'll grab my book and hop in the bed and just be ready for snuggies. Like snuggle up, sleep, sleep, sleep. That's definitely me. So I think just incorporating it into your routine and your ritual is really, really important. Just grab it in the morning, keep it by your bedside so that you can grab it in the morning or right before you go to bed and just get that 10 minutes in, or however long you need, or however long you decide to read. It'll be a great way to help you decompress. It'll also start to trigger your mind into being able to recognize relaxation and reading together. I cannot remember how many times I've fallen asleep reading a book just because I'm like really invested to what I'm reading, but as I'm reading, I'm getting more and more relaxed, and then my body's like, you haven't slept in 2 days, good night, and then I like sleep for 24 hours, and it's great, and then I wake up and read my book. So tip number 5 that I have for you is just to be kind to yourself. It's important not to beat yourself up on this journey, and not to compare yourself to who you are now to who you were. I know it's really hard because like if you read a lot before, noticing a huge decline in your reading capabilities, your reading wants and desires is really difficult, especially if you still label yourself as a reader. And it gets really hard not to compare yourself with others. So I just think that it's really important that you remind yourself that you are reading something that you enjoy. It's something that you find nice. So doing that for yourself and taking that time for yourself, even if other people are like, oh, you're going to go read your book and you don't want to go see a movie, you're going to stay home and read a book. I don't know if everybody's like that. I feel like most people this day and age are kind of like, it's chill, go do your thing. But just in case they're being weird about it, just look at them and be like, man, that kind of brings me into tip number 5, which is try your best not to get competitive. it's actually really hard in this day where like everything's about following and everything's about like influencers and doing what other people are doing and trying to pay attention to how much other people are doing in comparison to yourself and using their personal activities as a way to garner your successes. That does not make you less of a reader. That does not make reading less important to you. That just because they are reading 5 or 6, 10 million books a day doesn't mean that they're suddenly this literary god and you're nothing. In fact, you're both mortal. We're all human here. It's really, really easy to get caught up in that comparative notion. And I think that it puts so much pressure on us that sometimes we just don't, at least I know it has put pressure on me to a point where I feel like I don't have the right to read because I don't read the same books as a lot of the bookstagrammers that I follow. I don't like the same books that a lot of booktubers are talking about. So am I really as passionate about literature and reading as they are just because I don't do the same things? Or because I don't do the same things, I'm not as passionate as they are, which is like not at all the truth. And I think it's really important to remember that how we express that love of reading, experience reading, is unique to everyone because it is a very unique journey that we are on. You know, if you take a step away from something you've loved, that you have invested so much of your time in, it is hard to return when you feel like you've abandoned it, whenever you see other people who have been more consistent than you. And every time you come back and every time you invest a little bit more time in it, that is you making a personal success. And just because somebody's more consistent just means that they've been doing it longer. Doesn't mean they've been doing it better. So that brings us to tip number 8. Ignore the narrative of what you should read. Earlier, I talked a little bit about booktubers and bookstagrammers. Both are really great, but they also present a narrative of like, this is what you should be reading. These are like the most popular books. Same things with any like New York's bestseller lists. These things perpetuate this idea that there is a book that you should be reading. You don't gotta read shit that you don't want to read. Plain and simple. There is no like if, ands, or buts about it. If you don't want to read it, if you don't feel like it's going to vibe with you, don't read it. That does not make you less of a reader than the two. It just means that you have different interests. Like, I prefer reading YA books that are written with a surrealist style. I also prefer reading fantasy. That doesn't mean that I am not capable of reading the classics. It just means that the classics make me want to shoot myself in the head, and they remind me of school. And I would much rather read something that's fun. And by all means, if you love classical literature, no need to come at me, because I understand, and you should read what you want. And if you feel like that is your calling, to love classical literature, Dante's Infernos really gets your furnace going, you can't help but want to know what happens to the grapes in the Grapes of Wrath, just read what you want. It'll make you a lot happier. And succumbing to this idea of, well, all of these influential people are saying I should read this, does not mean that you should read it. Because a lot of people have suggested a lot of books written. But I'm just saying that just because someone says you should read it or it's a popular thing to read doesn't mean that you have to, and doesn't make it good. Which brings us to tip number 9. If novels really aren't your thing, if a full-length book, full-length motion picture of black and white typeface isn't really what interests you, why not try like novelettes or short stories? And I also highly recommend fan fiction, especially My Hero Academia fan fiction. It's faster to read, it's a couple of pages, it's something that you can invest in with familiar characters instead of learning an entirely new world. And revisit these familiar worlds that you already know the characters in, already have a lot of feelings about, and you're going to be able to better get back into your flow of things. Which brings us to tip number 10, tracking your reading progress. Just make sure you're tracking your progress, because even if you only read 7 books in a whole year, if you were reading 0 books a year, that's still a good start and something to be proud of. And you're going to want to know where you came from and where you are. But anywho, I hope that these tips gave you a really good idea of how to start getting back into reading.